Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into an age of wooden beams, rice paper walls, and the faint clack of sandals across tatami floors. You stir beneath a futon that smells faintly of smoke from last night's brazier, eyes blinking against the pale morning light that seeps through thin washi screens. The crows outside are louder than any alarm clock, and the floorboards creak as if they too resent being awake so early. You are a samurai, or at least the Edo-period version of one. That means less battlefield glory, more daily grind. Sorry to say, you probably wouldn't survive long if someone handed you a spear tomorrow, but don't worry, you're not the only one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first task of your day is simple, but somehow feels like climbing a mountain, rolling out of your futon. The straw beneath your back is uneven, the quilt heavy and reluctant to release you. You grunt, stretch, and finally force yourself upright, hair sticking up in directions that would earn you a sharp glare from a senior retainer. A basin of water waits in the corner, its surface thinly iced on colder mornings. You splash your face, shiver, and wonder again why anyone thinks this is invigorating. A mainstream fact: samurai were expected to rise before dawn, embodying discipline from the first moment of the day. Early rising symbolized readiness, even if the only thing you're ready for is another nap. The quirky tidbit? Some manuals gave instructions on how to fold futons correctly, as if improper bedding technique could expose moral weakness. You sigh, patting down your rumpled futon, half expecting a neighbor to peer through the wall and judge your honor by your sheets. Historians still argue whether every rank-and-file samurai actually kept such rigid routines, or whether many lingered lazily in bed, while higher-ranking officials claimed the virtue of dawn discipline. You suspect the truth falls somewhere in between. Discipline is easier to preach than to practice. Outside, the small courtyard glistens with dew, moss damp and stones slick. You breathe the cool air, rubbing sleep from your eyes. Somewhere down the lane, a rooster crows again, joined by the crackle of kindling as households coax flames back to life. Today stretches ahead, no battles, no sieges, just the 1,000 small duties that fill a warrior's life in a time of peace. You sigh, slide your sword into your sash, and remind yourself, getting out of bed was the first victory of the day. You shuffle back into the dim room, where the morning's first clatter of bowls tells you breakfast is waiting. The smell of steamed rice greets you, comforting and bland in equal measure, joined by the faint tang of miso and the sharper bite of pickled daikon. You lower yourself cross-legged before the low table, sliding your knees beneath it with a creak of fabric. This is no feast, it's fuel. The lacquered bowl of rice sits in the center, white and polished like snow piled into a neat mound. Beside it rests a small dish of tsukemono, pickled radish cut thin enough to crunch but thick enough to sting your tongue awake. Steam curls from a cup of green tea, grassy and bitter, meant less for indulgence and more for alertness. If you're lucky, there's miso soup with a lonely cube of tofu floating bravely in the broth. If you're very lucky, maybe a sliver of grilled fish, though your household budget doesn't allow such luxuries often. A mainstream fact: rice wasn't just food, it was currency. Your stipend, your lord's wealth, even your entire clan's standing was measured in koku, the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year, which means this morning's bowl is also your paycheck, sitting right there in front of you. Eat carefully, it's money on chopsticks. You chew slowly, the grains sticking faintly to your lips. Your wife sits across from you, already in battle mode with the abacus. Beads click like tiny wooden raindrops as she mutters sums under her breath. Taxes, debts, household supplies, all juggled with precision. You keep your eyes on your rice. Interfering here would be more dangerous than dueling 10 swordsmen at once. Your children, if you have them, are less reverent. They drop rice kernels on the tatami, smear soup on their sleeves, and make chopstick duels when they think no one's looking. You scold gently, lecturing about respect for the farmer's labor. They stare blankly, then giggle, clearly not buying it. It's hard to look dignified when you have miso stains on your robe. The quirky tidbit? Some Edo period guides recommended chewing each mouthful of rice 30 times before swallowing. claiming it improved health and self-control. You give it a try. By chew 15, you're questioning life choices. By chew 20, you're bored. By chew 30, you've forgotten what food even is. You gulp it down, muttering that mindfulness is overrated. Historians still argue whether lower-ranking samurai actually ate this frugal breakfast every day, or whether higher officials indulged in richer spreads of fish and sweets. Looking at your table now, you know where you fall, firmly in the rice and pickles again category. When the bowls are empty and your wife's abacus clicks to a decisive stop, you bow your head slightly in thanks for the food, for the work behind it, and for the fact that you managed not to spill tea on your hakama this time. Then you rise, sliding the shoji aside to let in the light. Your stomach is full, your pockets are still empty, and the day of samurai chores has only just begun. You kneel now in front of a low table, your sword resting across your lap like a loyal pet that never actually does anything. The lacquered scabbard catches the faint sunlight streaming through the paper window, while the blade inside waits, immaculate and unnecessary. You pull it free with care, the steel whispering against the wood as though it has secrets to share. Spoiler, it doesn't. A small kit lies beside you. Choji oil infused with clove, soft rice paper cloths, a powder ball filled with fine grit. You begin the ritual that every samurai knows, cleaning and oiling a weapon you'll probably never unsheath in anger. Each stroke of the cloth down the blade is precise, slow, and deliberate. You watch the faint streaks vanish, replaced by a mirrored gleam that reflects back your bleary-eyed face. Congratulations, you've polished away your breakfast crumbs. A mainstream fact, swords were considered the soul of the samurai, symbolic even when practical combat became rare. Neglecting one's sword was viewed as shameful, a lapse in honor. So even though your blade hasn't cut more than bamboo targets, or the occasional unlucky persimmon, it receives more care than your own knees, which are already sore from kneeling. You tilt the blade, admiring the wavy Hammond line etched by its tempering. Some treat this like sacred art. You mostly see a squiggly pattern that reminds you of a child's drawing. The quirky tidbit? Certain sword testers in Edo Japan measured sharpness by slicing through bundles of straw, stacks of paper, or even condemned corpses. Grim, yes, but considered scientific. You, fortunately, stick to paper and fruit. You once tried cutting old records, but quickly realized that shredding tax ledgers was a terrible career move. Historians still argue whether the cult of the sword was as intense in the everyday lives of samurai as later writers claimed, or whether it was largely a romantic gloss. Judging from your neighbors, half of them are genuinely devoted to sword lore, while the other half polish theirs mostly to avoid lectures from the first group. When the blade finally shines so brightly you can see the ceiling beams in it, you dab on a fresh coat of oil, slide it back into its saya, and bow slightly toward it. Yes, bowing to an object. Because apparently, dignity applies even to steel. Then you tuck the sword at your side once more, knowing you'll carry it all day without drawing it once. You rise stiffly, legs tingling from pins and needles, and mutter that maybe next time you'll polish your own back as thoroughly as this blade. The sword gleams silently in reply, smug as ever. You step into the office, a low wooden hall that smells faintly of cedar and stale ink. Sunlight filters through narrow slats, striping the tatami in pale gold, while dust motes drift like lazy spirits. You lower yourself onto a cushion before a desk stacked precariously with scrolls, ledgers, and petitions. Today's enemy is not a rival clan, it's bureaucracy. You grind the ink stick against the stone, the rasping sound already wearing on your patience. The ink thickens into a dark pool, sticky and unforgiving. You dip your brush and unroll the first document, a rice stipend ledger. Columns of numbers, names, and fields stretch endlessly across the parchment, daring you to find a mistake. Spoiler, there's always a mistake. A mainstream fact. By the Edo period, most samurai were administrators and record keepers rather than fighters. The Tokugawa shogunate prioritized peace and order, and armies of retainers transformed into armies of clerks. Maintaining rice accounts, resolving land disputes, and stamping seals became the true work of the warrior class. Your brush scratches across the paper, careful and deliberate. The kanji blur after a while, rows of rice measurements turning into an ocean of strokes. Your back aches, and you catch yourself doodling a tiny sparrow in the margin just to stay sane. Across the room, another retainer nods off, chin dipping dangerously close to his inkwell. You silently wager how long until his forehead gets a new tattoo of black smudge. The quirky tidbit? Official documents weren't valid without clan seals, intricately carved stamps pressed into red ink. Placement was everything. Crooked seals could cast doubt, and disputes sometimes erupted over whether a stamp leaned left or right. You practice aligning yours with surgical care, then sigh when the ink bleeds anyway. Somewhere, a bureaucrat is already sharpening a complaint about your stamp etiquette. Historians still argue whether samurai resented this paper-bound existence or embraced it as the price of stability. Judging by your sore fingers and empty stomach, you lean toward resentment. But then again, without peace, there would be no rice ledgers. And without rice ledgers, there would be no breakfast. A cruel circle. By midday, your desk looks like a battlefield of scrolls, ink blots, and seals. You set down your brush, flex stiff hands, and stare blankly at the ceiling. The beams above seem to mock you with their simple, unchanging strength. Meanwhile, your dignity feels fragile, one ink splatter away from collapse. At last, the clerk in charge calls a halt. You bow stiffly, gather the scrolls, and rise on aching knees. The paperwork has been conquered for the day, though you know tomorrow will bring another stack just as tall. You step back into the sun, grateful for air that doesn't smell like ink, and wonder if any ancestor of yours would recognize stamping rice tallies as samurai duty. Probably not. But here you are, seal ink still on your sleeve. The air outside the office is brighter, freer, though your shoulders are still heavy from scroll duty. Today's task pulls you further into the heart of your lord's domain, out toward the rice paddies. You tug your sandals tight and make your way down a narrow dirt path lined with tall grasses swaying in the breeze. The earthy scent of damp soil drifts on the air, mingling with the croak of frogs and the steady buzz of cicadas. Soon the fields stretch before you, wide, shimmering squares of water, each holding neat rows of rice shoots like green combs against the horizon. Farmers bend low, backs curved, straw hats shading their faces as they plant and weed. Their sleeves are rolled up, their ankles sunk deep in muck. You pause on the raised footpath, hands on hips, sword at your side, surveying it all with the practiced air of someone who doesn't actually know what he's looking at. A mainstream fact, samurai didn't till fields themselves. Their role was to oversee, enforce order, and collect rice taxes. Rice wasn't just food, it was the entire backbone of the Tokugawa economy. Peasants worked it, samurai counted it, and lords measured their wealth in koku. Standing here, you realize the people ankle-deep in mud are the ones actually keeping your household afloat. You clear your throat meaningfully, hoping the sound alone straightens stalks. A farmer glances up, bows respectfully, then returns to tugging weeds. Another pauses long enough to offer a faint smile, the kind that says, "Yes, yes, honored overseer, we know you're very important." You nod gravely, pretending your presence makes a difference. The quirky tidbit? Farmers sometimes watered down their paddies or hid portions of the harvest to reduce their taxable yield. Inspectors developed elaborate measuring techniques, stretching ropes, poking soil with bamboo rods, but villagers usually stayed one trick ahead. You suspect they're outsmarting you right now, perhaps chuckling under their breath as you squint at the rows with feigned expertise. Historians still argue whether peasants genuinely respected their samurai overseers or merely tolerated them out of necessity. Some accounts describe farmers offering gifts of vegetables or sake as gestures of loyalty. Others suggest it was closer to survival strategy. Better to humor the man with the sword than to risk punishment. Watching these farmers work tirelessly while you stand clean and dry, you suspect the latter. The sun climbs higher, sweat dampens your collar, and the buzzing of insects grows louder. You shift from foot to foot, sandals slipping on damp earth, sword clanking every time you adjust your stance. After a while, you give up pretending and simply enjoy the breeze carrying the smell of green shoots and wet mud. When you finally turn back toward town, sandals muddy and dignity slightly frayed, you realize the truth. The rice will grow whether you're watching or not. Still, you've played your role, walked the path, and reminded the fields that samurai eyes linger even if they don't understand what they see. You return from the paddies with mud clinging to your sandals, only to hear the sharp chorus of children's voices drifting from a side street. Curiosity tugs you closer, and soon you find yourself peering into a modest schoolroom, a place where the next generation of the warrior class wrestles with their own daily battles. Inside, a dozen boys sit on tatami mats, their backs stiff, brushes poised above sheets of paper. A teacher in simple robes paces slowly, correcting posture, frowning at sloppy strokes, and occasionally tapping a student's wrist with a bamboo stick. The room smells of ink, wood, and faint nervous sweat. You remember being in their place once, shoulders tight, hands aching, desperately trying to make your brush obey. A mainstream fact. Children of samurai families attended Terakoya, temple schools, or domain academies where they learned calligraphy, reading, arithmetic, and Confucian ethics. Education was considered essential. After all, a warrior of peace needed brains to balance the rice ledgers he'd one day inherit. Swordplay mattered, yes, but only after the ink dried. One boy groans softly as his kanji collapses into an unrecognizable tangle. The teacher sighs, shakes his head, and orders him to start again. You hide a smile, remembering your own lopsided characters that looked more like beetles than words. The quirky tidbit? Some schools even trained children to compose formal letters of apology in advance, as if failure in life was guaranteed and etiquette demanded a pre-written sorry note. You can almost hear a sarcastic future voice. Dear Daimyo, apologies for my disastrous sword form and unpaid debts. Please accept this beautifully calligraphed regret. Historians still argue whether this rigorous early training truly instilled loyalty and discipline or merely churned out anxious clerks in waiting. Looking at these children, you see both. One recites Confucian maxims with earnest pride, while another sneaks a doodle of a carp in the margin of his exercise sheet. Both are samurai in training, though in very different ways. The lesson shifts to etiquette. Students rise, bow in unison, and practice greetings appropriate for meeting elders, peers, or lords. Their little voices mumble through formulas, some too shy, others overconfident. You can't help but chuckle when one boy bows so low he tips onto his nose. The teacher pretends not to smile, but his eyes betray him. As the children return to their seats, you step back into the street, sandals crunching softly on gravel. Behind you, the drone of recitation continues, punctuated by the occasional sigh or groan. Ahead, the day stretches on with more duties for you to face. Yet for a moment, you linger on the thought. These children are tomorrow's samurai, inheriting both ink and sword. And if their handwriting is any indication, the future is going to be slightly crooked but very determined. The sound of children's recitations fades behind you, replaced soon enough by the sharper ring of wooden swords. You follow the noise into the training yard, where comrades gather in neat rows, hakama swishing, blades strapped at their sides. The air here carries the scent of trampled earth, sweat, and faint iron. You slip into place among them, spine straight, face solemn, because it's time once again for martial drills, the daily performance of warriors without wars. The instructor barks a command and everyone bows. Hands move as one, drawing swords with crisp swishes, though no opponent stands before you. The kata begins. Step, slash, pivot, sheath. Again, again. The pattern repeats until the rhythm of sandals on dirt feels like the pounding of drums. You're not dueling an enemy, you're dueling fatigue. A mainstream fact. Edo-period samurai spent far more time rehearsing forms than fighting real battles. The Tokugawa peace meant combat was rare, yet training preserved the image of discipline. Schools of swordsmanship flourished, each with slightly different stances and philosophies, and many samurai practiced them religiously. The sun beats down and the courtyard glimmers with sweat on foreheads. A comrade beside you wobbles in his stance, nearly tripping on his own hakama. You fight the urge to laugh, focusing instead on your blade slicing clean arcs through empty air. The quirky tidbit? Some schools drilled bizarre variations, like drawing swords with the feet or rolling across the ground mid-strike. Exercises equal parts practical and theatrical. You're secretly relieved today's session keeps you upright. The kata shifts to spears. Long shafts snap forward in unison, tips aimed at straw targets that never move. Your muscles strain with each thrust, and the instructor's voice cuts the air like a whip. Next comes archery, the tall Yumi bows creaking as arrows arc into straw butts. The targets thud satisfyingly, but let's face it, straw doesn't shoot back. Your own arrow lands embarrassingly far from center. You nod as though you meant it, demonstrating humility, of course. Historians still argue whether these exercises were genuinely believed to preserve martial spirit, or were mostly symbolic rituals to remind samurai of their warrior identity. Looking around at your comrades, half fierce, half exhausted, you suspect both truths lived side by side. Finally, the instructor calls halt. You sheath your sword, bow, and wipe your brow, arms aching and robe clinging to your skin. Around you, comrades mutter complaints, boast about imaginary victories, or tease the one who nearly sliced off his sleeve. You join their laughter, because shared exhaustion is its own kind of brotherhood. Leaving the yard, you feel both pride and futility. You've honored tradition, kept the forms alive, and sweated enough to remind your body it's still a tool of war. Yet deep down, you know, your fiercest battle today was against repetition, and repetition, as always, has won. Your arms are still humming from the drills when another duty tugs at you. Not swords, not ledgers, but armor. You step into a storage room tucked deep in the compound, where lacquered chests line the walls like silent guardians. The air smells of cedar planks and faint must, the kind that clings to objects waiting years between uses. You kneel before a chest, slide the lid aside, and there it is. A cuirass of black lacquered plates laced with faded silk cords, helmet resting like a slumbering beast atop the pile. You lift it carefully, surprised again by its weight, and brush dust from the crest. The iron smells faintly of oil, though the edges betray a creeping speck of rust. A mainstream fact. Armor in the Edo period was often ceremonial, paraded during processions or displayed in households, rather than worn for real combat. Many suits were inherited, passed down as family heirlooms, maintained more for show than for war. You run a cloth along the curved plates, polishing until the lacquer shines. The helmet's antler-shaped crest looks impressive, but you know it's mostly theater now. A costume of power in a world where arrows rarely fly. The quirky tidbit? Some samurai reportedly stuffed their armor chests with mothballs made of pungent herbs, or even tucked love letters into hidden compartments. You resist the urge to check whether your predecessor left behind anything scandalous. Historians still argue whether these suits were ever worn in earnest after the Great Peace settled in, or whether they quickly devolved into parade pieces. As you heft the breastplate, your knees buckle slightly. If war ever did come, you're not sure you'd make it past the front gate without collapsing. Piece by piece, you check cords, tighten knots, and oil hinges on the iron plates. The silence of the room is broken only by the occasional creak of leather straps. You pause to try on the helmet, its heavy rim narrowing your vision. Through the slit, the world looks smaller, darker. You take it off quickly, relieved to breathe freely again. When you finally close the chest, the armor gleams faintly in the dim light, a relic both majestic and useless. You bow to it out of habit, then rub your sore shoulders. Carrying paperwork may be tedious, but at least scrolls don't weigh 30 pounds. Stepping back into the corridor, you leave the armor to its slumber. It will wait there patiently, season after season, polished and pristine, a reminder of battles that will never come, and of the weight of history you carry whether you fight or not. Your shoulders ache from hefting armor, so it feels almost merciful when the next duty is gentler, a break for tea. You enter a small tatami room where the air smells faintly of roasted leaves and smoldering charcoal. A low brazier glows softly, heating water in an iron kettle whose lid rattles ever so slightly with the simmer. You kneel by the lacquered table as cups are set before you, thin porcelain, plain yet dignified. The host, a fellow retainer with a flair for ceremony, moves with deliberate grace, folding cloth, lifting ladle, pouring the steaming liquid with all the gravity of a military maneuver. You bow as your cup is offered, though inside you wonder how anyone stays this serious about hot water and leaves. A mainstream fact, tea gatherings had long been embedded in samurai culture. They weren't just about refreshment. They were performances of etiquette, patience, and refinement. How you bowed, how you held the cup, even how you admired its glaze, all reflected your inner composure. You raise the cup in both hands, sip slowly, and try not to burn your tongue. The tea is grassy, slightly bitter, and soothing, despite your earlier skepticism. Around you, the room hums with soft voices. First, it's polite talk, weather, stipends, the last edict from Edo. But soon, the true entertainment seeps in, gossip. One retainer leans close, whispering about the magistrate's cousin sneaking off to the pleasure quarters. Another mutters that the rice inspectors are being outsmarted again, this time with cleverly hidden patties. You sip with feigned detachment, but your ears perk like a cat at a fishmonger's stall. The quirky tidbit? Some hosts owned extravagant tea utensils, bowls imported from China, bamboo whisks carved so fine they seemed spun from air. A few even bankrupted themselves trying to outshine rivals at tea. You glance down at your chipped cup, suddenly proud of its humble sturdiness. Historians still argue whether these sessions were truly about cultural cultivation or just clever excuses to gather and trade rumors under a respectable cover. Judging by the sly smiles around the table, you suspect both. The tea may be hot, but the gossip is hotter. When the last dregs are drained, the cups set down, and the bows exchanged, you rise with renewed energy. The caffeine hums in your veins, the scandal hums louder in your head, and you step outside grinning faintly. For a class obsessed with dignity, you think, samurai sure love a little tea-fueled drama. The street outside hums with the pulse of daily life. You leave behind the quiet formality of the tea room and wander into the castle town proper, where stalls creak open, merchants shout prices, and the smells of grilled fish and fresh lacquer mingle in the air. Your sword at your hip grants you dignity, but your eyes keep drifting hungrily toward skewers sizzling over open coals. You move through the bustle at a measured pace, sandals tapping softly on the packed earth. Women in patterned cotton balance baskets on their hips, craftsmen hammer iron in open front workshops, and a boy darts past waving a pinwheel, its paper blades flashing in the afternoon sun. You pause before a stall hung with woodblock prints, their bold colors depicting kabuki actors frozen mid-pose. You lean in, admiring the swirls of ink, then quickly straighten. Technically, you're not supposed to indulge too much in theater culture. But it's hard not to be intrigued by actors with faces painted like fierce demons. A mainstream fact. Castle towns of the Edo period were carefully structured. Merchants and artisans lived in designated quarters, their prosperity tethered to supplying the warrior class. Though samurai stood above them socially, in practice it was these townsfolk who provided the goods and comforts that kept your household afloat. A bookseller beckons you toward shelves stacked with poetry collections, travel guides, even sensational tales of haunted temples. You flip one open discreetly, skimming a story of a fox spirit outwitting hapless villagers. You close it quickly when you notice another retainer across the street. Better to seem studious than frivolous. The quirky tidbit? Some kabuki plays were thinly veiled commentaries on current politics, cloaked in historical settings to avoid censorship. Everyone in the audience knew the satire, yet officials turned a blind eye as long as the jokes didn't cut too close to real power. You imagine slipping into a theater in disguise one evening, wide hat pulled low, hoping no one recognizes you clapping at the punchlines. You pass a blacksmith's forge, sparks spitting from glowing iron as the hammer rings. A set of stirrups gleams in the window, though your horse hasn't been ridden for more than ceremonial trots in years. Across the way, an apothecary lays out jars of powdered herbs, some promising longevity, others energy, though you suspect most are just flavored dust. Historians still argue whether samurai truly resented their dependency on merchants or quietly appreciated it. Standing here with your coin purse already lighter from skewers and a woodblock print tucked discreetly under your sleeve, you know the answer for yourself. Dependency may bruise pride, but it keeps the belly happy. The sun begins to slope westward, shadows stretching long across the street. Vendors sweep up rice husks and close their shutters, while lanterns glow to life above doorways. The chatter of the market fades to a softer hum as you make your way home. Your steps are unhurried, your stomach pleasantly full, and your sleeve just heavy enough to remind you that tonight, when no one is looking, you'll unroll that forbidden kabuki print and study it by lamplight. The street's quiet as you slip back into your household compound. The wooden gate closing with a muted thud behind you. Lanterns glow faintly along the veranda, casting soft halos across the gravel courtyard. Inside, the air is calm but purposeful. The sound of abacus beads clacking, the faint scrape of ink brushes, the shuffle of slippers across tatami. You've returned to the true center of your daily world, home. Your wife sits at a low table, sleeves tucked neatly back, the abacus rattling beneath her nimble fingers. She tallies rice reserves, household expenses, and perhaps your occasional indulgences in the castle town. You watch from the doorway, wisely silent. You know this battlefield well. Here, she is the general. Interfere, and you'll lose before you've even drawn your sword. A mainstream fact. Samurai households often lived on stipends barely large enough to sustain them, their status outranking their income. Women of the household, wives, mothers, even daughters, took charge of managing finances, ensuring rice and coin stretched to cover everything from food to clothing to ceremonial duties. In another corner, your children practice calligraphy. Their small hands tremble as they grip brushes, ink bleeding into uneven lines that resemble anything but proper kanji. One child proudly shows you a lopsided character that might be tree or might be dragon. You nod solemnly, praising it as though it were a masterpiece worthy of the shogun's library. The child beams, cheeks flushed, before smearing ink across a sleeve in triumph. The quirky tidbit? Some children learned by writing with water on wooden boards so their mistakes evaporated, sparing them shame. You envy that trick, imagining how much easier adult paperwork would be if errors simply vanished in the air. Instead, your mistakes live forever on scrolls filed away by stern clerks who never forget. Historians still argue whether samurai wives wielded this household power reluctantly or embraced it as their true sphere of influence. Watching your wife's brow furrow over the abacus, lips moving silently as she recalculates, you're convinced she rules this space with more authority than most retainers show in council chambers. Supper comes. Rice, miso, maybe a small portion of fish if luck smiled today. You all sit cross-legged, bowls in hand, conversation weaving between gentle scolding of children and updates on your duties. Your wife mentions a leaking roof beam, your son interrupts with a tale of a frog he caught, and you nod sagely at both as if you're equally capable of repairing timber and taming amphibians. After the meal, you step briefly into the small garden. Fireflies wink among the reeds, their glow reflecting in your children's eyes as they chase them with cupped hands. You lean on the veranda rail, sword resting quietly at your side, and watch their laughter float up into the night. The air smells of damp moss and charcoal smoke, grounding you in the quiet truth. Whatever your duties beyond these walls, this is what you truly guard. The following evening arrives with the steady hum of drums and the faint scent of incense. Tonight is not about ledgers or drills, but about the rhythm of the seasons and the rituals that keep community life pulsing. You make your way down the lantern-lit street, where townsfolk gather in bright yukata, laughter and chatter swelling like a river in flood. At the shrine entrance, banners ripple in the breeze, painted with bold clan crests. Vendors line the path, selling grilled mochi, skewered squid, and sweet rice cakes dusted in soybean powder. Children tug at sleeves, begging for paper lanterns shaped like rabbits or foxes. You breathe it all in, the smoke, the sugar, the humanity, and feel strangely lighter. A mainstream fact. Seasonal festivals in the Edo period tied samurai, peasants, and merchants together, marking the year with shrine processions, firework displays, and temple observances. Attendance wasn't optional. It was a way of affirming loyalty to lord, community, and tradition all at once. You clap twice before the shrine, bow, and drop a coin into the offertory box. The clang echoes faintly, and you hope the gods don't judge your stinginess. Just beyond, men shoulder a mikoshi, a portable shrine, chanting as they sway it down the street. You clap politely, though privately, you pray they don't rope you in. One slip of the back and you'd be groaning for a week. The quirky tidbit? During summer fireworks, samurai were often seated in carefully ranked rows, as though even the heavens had to respect the bureaucratic pecking order. You imagine explaining to your child why their view of the exploding sky depends entirely on rice allotments, and you chuckle at the absurdity. Historians still argue whether samurai genuinely cherished these festivals or merely tolerated them as duties disguised in celebration. Watching the crowd, you suspect both. Some sway with reverence, while others are clearly here for the food stalls. You lean toward the latter yourself, chewing happily on a stick of grilled eel you swore you wouldn't buy. As the evening deepens, dancers fill the square, sleeves fluttering like wings as they circle the drums. You edge closer, shuffle your feet to mimic the steps, and nearly trip over your hakama. A child laughs openly at you. You bow gravely, pretending your stumble was a deliberate demonstration of humility. Finally, the fireworks crackle to life above the shrine. Red chrysanthemums, green serpents, white bursts that rain like falling stars. The crowd gasps, faces glowing in the light. Even the sternest retainers tilt their heads skyward with childlike awe. You let the sparks wash over you, heart loosening with each bloom of fire. When the last ember fades and smoke drifts like pale ghosts, the drums quiet, and the lanterns guide you home. Your sandals crunch softly on gravel, your sleeves still smelling faintly of grilled squid, your mind buzzing with fireworks long after the sky has gone dark. The next night falls quieter, though not without its own duties. Tonight, your task is patrol, a responsibility meant to uphold order, though truthfully it's more about presence than action. You take up a lantern marked with your clan's crest, its glow painting soft circles on the road ahead as you step into the darkened streets. The town feels different at night. By day, stalls shout and smithies ring. By night, only the creak of shutters and the distant strum of shamisen linger. The air smells of cooling charcoal and damp earth. Your sandals scuff softly on the packed dirt, the sound oddly loud in the hush. A mainstream fact. Samurai were often assigned night duty, walking castle towns to enforce curfews, deter mischief, and remind everyone that authority never slept. Yet violence was rare. The peace of the Tokugawa era meant patrols were more symbolic than dangerous. You pass a sake house, its doorway glowing faintly. Laughter spills out, followed by two men stumbling into the street. One belts out a song, the other tries desperately to quiet him. You pause, raise one eyebrow with deliberate slowness. They freeze, bow hurriedly, and scuttle away, voices dropping to whispers. Once again, your eyebrow proves more effective than any blade. The quirky tidbit? Those patrol lanterns, emblazoned with crests, served as glowing billboards of authority, but also gave troublemakers plenty of warning. Mischief makers simply waited in the shadows until the light passed, then carried on. You wonder sometimes if your lantern isn't a tool of order, but of convenient scheduling for thieves. Historians still argue whether these patrols genuinely kept towns safer, or whether crime rates were already so low that samurai merely enjoyed leisurely moonlit walks. Judging by tonight's calm streets, you suspect the latter. The greatest danger so far has been tripping over a stray dog sleeping across the road. You stroll past shuttered shops, the faint scent of herbs wafting from a locked apothecary. From somewhere distant, the pluck of a shamisen floats through the air, haunting and sweet. For a moment you pause, lantern swaying, letting the melody soften the monotony of your steps. The hours drag slowly. You circle the same streets again, nod politely at another patrol passing in the opposite direction, both of you pretending this exchange is crucial to maintaining law and order. Your lantern grows heavier, your arms ache, and you wonder if sleep wouldn't serve the realm better than this ritual walk. At last, the guardhouse lantern comes into view. You extinguish your own, bow slightly to the sentry, and step back into the compound. Another peaceful night recorded, another set of streets walked without incident. You return with no glory, no duels, no foes defeated, only the quiet victory of enduring tedium with as much dignity as possible. The streets may be calm, but once you've shed the patrol lantern, another ritual calls. A quieter one, yet equally revealing. Back in your quarters, you set aside the sword and reach instead for paper, brush, and ink. Tonight isn't about ledgers or official seals, it's about letters and verses. The inkstone rasp fills the silence as you grind the stick in water, dark liquid pooling slowly, thick and fragrant. You steady your brush, unroll a sheet of paper, and begin the familiar rhythm of polite correspondence. Perhaps you write to a distant cousin serving in another domain, or to a comrade posted far from town. The lines follow etiquette. You wish them health, apologize for not writing sooner, and include the required seasonal observations. Still, you slip in small human details. Your child's crooked kanji, the frog that insists on singing outside your window, the latest festival fireworks that rattled your roof tiles. A mainstream fact. Letter writing was essential in Edo society. Travel was restricted, so brush and paper carried relationships across provinces. For samurai, handwriting wasn't just functional. It was a reflection of refinement and status. Elegant strokes could elevate your reputation almost as much as a polished sword. You lean forward, tongue pressing the corner of your lip in concentration, trying to keep each stroke fluid. When your hand trembles and a line blots, you sigh, another battle scar of correspondence. The quirky tidbit? Some samurai kept saigai-cho, little notebooks for spontaneous poems or observations. A few even tucked verses into official reports, sneaking moonlit haiku between rice tallies. You chuckle at the idea of slipping one into tomorrow's paperwork. Ink stains multiply faster than my stipend grows. Yet rice waits for me. Historians still argue whether samurai wrote poetry with genuine devotion or out of sheer obligation to cultural expectations. You suspect both. Some men sought solace in verse, while others scribbled lines just to prove they weren't barbarians in robes. Tonight, as you watch your ink dry into faint gray lines, you find yourself somewhere in the middle. When the letters are finished, you shift to poetry proper. The lamp flickers, shadows lean across the room, and the moon outside peeks pale through the shoji. Inspiration comes reluctantly, then all at once. You write of the night breeze cooling your skin, of armor gathering dust, of a sword that gleams but never strikes. The words are uneven, perhaps clumsy, but they ease something in your chest. You set the brush down, fan the pages lightly, and roll them carefully. Somewhere, someone will read these lines and glimpse your day. Not the image of a warrior carved in legend, but the real samurai. Ink-stained fingers, aching knees, and a heart softened by moonlight. Your brush hand still tingles from ink when another kind of water beckons. The bathhouse steams at the edge of the district, its wooden frame glowing with lanterns and humming with laughter. You step inside, slide your sword into the rack by the door, and feel instantly lighter. Because in here, titles and weapons stay outside. The air is thick with warmth, fragrant with cedar planks and faint herbal notes drifting from tubs infused with seasonal leaves. Wooden buckets clatter, ladles splash, and voices bounce off the damp walls. You strip down, settle onto a low stool, and pour steaming water over yourself. The first splash burns enough to make you hiss, but soon the heat seeps into your bones, pushing out the stiffness of drills and patrols. A mainstream fact: public bathhouses in the Edo period were a cornerstone of urban life. For samurai, they weren't just places of hygiene, but also spaces of relaxation, camaraderie, and social exchange. Here, sweat, gossip, and laughter mingled more freely than in any council chamber. You rinse thoroughly, scrub your arms with a rough cloth, then step into the main tub. The water embraces you, hot and heavy, turning your body limp as a noodle. Around you, other retainers sigh audibly, their stern faces softened by steam. The atmosphere loosens tongues. Soon, conversation sparks. Someone complains about the latest rice inspections. Another retells a story of a patrol interrupted by a stray goat, and laughter echoes like thunder in a cavern. The quirky tidbit? Some bathhouses advertise special waters infused with minerals or herbs, claiming miraculous cures. A few proprietors even promised rejuvenation of hair. You sink deeper into the tub, half wishing it were true, but mostly grateful your joints feel 20 years younger, for the next half hour anyway. Historians still argue whether bathhouse talk ever shaped politics, if casual jokes here spilled into real decisions the next morning. Listening to the chatter, you can't quite imagine decrees being born between wrinkled fingers and soapy towels. Yet stranger things have happened. A man beside you cracks a joke about another retainer's disastrous spear form, and the tub erupts in laughter. You laugh too, chest shaking, steam fogging your vision until everyone blurs into silhouettes. For once, camaraderie feels easy, stripped of armor, stripped of rank. When the heat finally overwhelms you, you climb out slowly, reaching for a towel so small it's more a suggestion than a cloth. You dry as best you can, tie your robe, and step outside. The cool night air rushes against your damp skin, sharp and refreshing. Above, the stars glimmer like pale embers, distant yet steady. You walk home lighter, body softened, spirit rinsed clean. Tonight you think sleep will come easily. If only every chore left you this warm and weightless. Your skin still hums from the bathhouse steam, but the night isn't finished testing your patience. Back in your quarters, another ritual waits. Less relaxing, more demanding. You sit before a low desk again, this time not for ledgers or letters, but for calligraphy practice. Brush, ink, paper, the eternal trio. You grind the ink stick against the stone, watching the dark pool spread and steady your breath. The lamp flickers beside you, casting your shadow long across the tatami. You lift the brush, angle it just so, and lower it to the page. The stroke should glide like a crane across water, but yours stumbles like a drunk pigeon. You sigh, adjust your grip, and try again. A mainstream fact: calligraphy was a core discipline for samurai, valued not just as writing but as proof of refinement and self-mastery. Beautiful strokes reflected a beautiful mind, or so the manuals claimed. Clumsy characters, meanwhile, whispered of sloppy spirit. No pressure, of course. You copy characters over and over: loyalty, discipline, harmony. Each stroke demands patience. Each blot of ink is a silent rebuke. Your knees ache from kneeling, your back stiffens, but you persist. Around you, the house is hushed, your children long asleep, your wife already rolling up the abacus for tomorrow's accounts. Only the scratch of brush and the soft hiss of oil in the lamp remain. The quirky tidbit? Some calligraphy masters insisted students practice by writing enormous characters on the ground with broom-sized brushes, claiming big strokes freed the spirit. You picture yourself sweeping giant kanji across your garden until neighbors complain about trampled moss. Maybe not tonight. Historians still argue whether samurai truly cherished calligraphy for its artistry or endured it as another imposed duty. Judging from the cramped scowl on your face right now, you'd argue for the latter. Yet, even as frustration grows, a strange calm threads through your motions. The repetition steadies your breath, slows your mind, turns the page into a mirror of your own stubbornness. At last, you set the brush down. The page before you is messy but alive. Lines too heavy here, too thin there, yet somehow carrying your pulse within them. You fan it dry, stack it with the day's letters, and bow slightly toward the inkstone, as if acknowledging a duel well fought. Your fingers are stained, your robe spotted, but your spirit feels oddly quieter. For all its demands, calligraphy has carved the noise out of your head. You extinguish the lamp, the darkness settling like ink across the room, and let the silence carry you into the next task the night might bring. The brush marks are still drying on your calligraphy sheets when a softer sound creeps into the night, the twang of shamisen strings drifting from a neighbor's veranda. The notes bend and sway, playful yet mournful, as though the instrument itself can't decide whether to laugh or cry. You pause, then reach for your own shamisen, its lacquered body gleaming faintly in the lamplight. You pluck a hesitant note. The skin buzzes beneath your pick, the sound trembling into the quiet. Your fingers stumble at first, but soon they remember the patterns. The melody sways, not elegant, but sincere. It's no battlefield horn, no martial drum, just a weary samurai playing a three-stringed companion into the night. A mainstream fact, music and games were common recreations for samurai families in Edo Japan. With little war to fight, leisure filled the gaps. Shamisen, koto, and flutes wove through households, while board games like Go or Sugoroku tested minds in friendlier combat. Entertainment wasn't luxury, it was survival against boredom. You set the shamisen aside and join a friend for a round of Go. The stones click against the wooden board, black and white armies sprawling into shapes that mimic campaigns long past. You squint, trying to look strategic, though half your moves are guesses. Your opponent smirks knowingly. You distract him with small talk about kabuki plays you're not technically supposed to attend. The quirky tidbit? Samurai sometimes snuck into theaters disguised in plain robes, hats pulled low. Officially forbidden, unofficially common. Some even commissioned woodblock prints of their favorite actors while pretending these prints were cultural study. You pat your sleeve, where last night's kabuki print still hides, and smile faintly at the thought. Historians still argue whether these diversions weakened samurai discipline or simply reflected the peace of the era. Sitting here, humming along to a neighbor's shamisen while plotting dubious Go strategies, you suspect the latter. Discipline can only stretch so far before the human heart demands play. When the game ends, badly for you, you accept defeat with mock solemnity, bowing to your opponent as though he has conquered a province. He laughs, the sound bouncing easily between you. You leave the board behind, the shamisen strings still vibrating faintly in the air, and step into the veranda. The night sky yawns wide above, stars pricking the dark, while somewhere distant a kabuki chorus carries on in secret. You breathe it all in, the music, the games, the whispers of theater, and realize a warrior's piece is made not just of scrolls and drills, but of stolen laughter, clattering stones, and strings that tremble like your own heart. The shamisen's last note fades, but the house itself isn't ready to sleep. You slide open the paper door to the main room, where your family gathers for the softer hours of evening. The lamplight glows warmly across tatami mats, catching on bowls stacked neatly from supper and on your children's sleepy but restless faces. Your wife sets aside her sewing, smiling faintly as the little ones tumble toward you with questions about frogs they caught earlier, about the fireflies they failed to catch, about whether the moon follows them when they walk. You lower yourself cross-legged onto the mat, letting them clamber into your lap, their chatter more persistent than any instructor's lecture. A mainstream fact. Edo-period samurai households placed heavy emphasis on moral education within the family. Fathers were expected to model dignity, while mothers oversaw daily discipline and etiquette. The home was not only a refuge, but also a classroom, shaping the next generation of retainers. Your eldest son recites a Confucian maxim he learned at school, voice careful and proud. Your daughter holds up a page of calligraphy, lines so wobbly they could be mistaken for waves. You praise both with equal gravity, declaring them worthy of poets and sages. They beam, unaware that your sleeve is still ink-stained from your own less-than-perfect practice. The quirky tidbit? Some manuals advised parents to stage small moral plays for their children, acting out little dramas of loyalty and honesty so lessons would sink in. You imagine yourself donning a silly mask, pretending to be a greedy merchant who loses everything, and laugh quietly at the thought. Your wife raises an eyebrow. You suspect she would play the wise advisor role much too convincingly. Historians still argue whether these family moments were as serene as later writers described, or whether real households like yours were filled with more squabbles and spilled soup than poetic serenity. Judging by your son's chopsticks currently being used as toy spears, you lean toward the latter. The evening drifts on with small joys. A game of Sugoroku is set up, dice clattering across the board, children squealing at each twist of fortune. You play along, losing deliberately here, winning just enough there, until bedtime protests are drowned by yawns. Your wife shepherds them toward futons, smoothing hair, tucking sleeves, murmuring goodnights. At last, the house quiets. You sit with her a while longer, sharing small stories of the day, the farmers who ignored your stern posture, the rumor whispered over tea, the near disaster during drills. She chuckles softly, shaking her head, and for a moment you both forget stipends, ledgers, and duties. When she finally extinguishes the lamp, the room sinks into darkness, except for a square of moonlight falling across the floor. You stretch out on the futon, the memory of your children's laughter still clinging to the air. For all the weight of tradition and duty, this is the true armor. Family gathered in warmth, their small voices echoing long after sleep claims them. The house is hushed now, but your body remembers the rhythm of evening duty. You light a single lamp, the flame trembling as though reluctant to stay awake, and prepare for the final chores before rest. A bowl of leftover rice sits in the corner, cooled and sticky, waiting to be eaten or saved. You scoop a little into your palm, roll it clumsily into a ball, and pop it into your mouth. Cold, bland, and still oddly comforting. Your wife moves quietly around the room, folding garments, stacking bowls, and setting aside tomorrow's tasks. You watch her, marveling at how much of the household turns on her silent efficiency. Then you rise to help, sweeping tatami crumbs into a bamboo pan, carrying ash from the brazier out to the garden. Small chores, humble but steady. A mainstream fact. Evenings in Edo households often involve tidying, preparing bedding, and securing lamps before sleep. Oil and candles were expensive, so people conserved light carefully, leaving only 1 or 2 flames burning late. Every gesture was economical, a small defense against waste. Once the futons are unrolled, your children shuffle back into the room, hair mussed from half-sleep. They murmur about ghosts, about fox spirits said to wander at night, and insist on one last story. You sigh but settle down cross-legged, clearing your throat. You recount a tale of a wise warrior outsmarting a trickster fox with nothing but patience. Halfway through, your youngest falls asleep on your knee, drooling onto your hakama. You carry them gently to their futon, sliding under the quilt with practiced care. The quirky tidbit? Some families mark time by special candle clocks, sticks of wax with marks burned into them to indicate the hour. You glance at the lamp beside you, oil sinking lower, and imagine your life ticked away 1 mark of wax at a time. Sobering thought, but also a handy excuse for bedtime. Historians still argue whether these evenings were moments of calm reflection or simply filled with chores too mundane to bother recording. As you fold one last garment and set the broom aside, you feel the answer is both. Mundane, yes, but also grounding, anchoring you to family, to rhythm, to the simple dignity of routine. You settle beside your wife, both of you sighing in near unison. She teases you about your drool-covered hakama, You tease her about abacus clicking in her sleep. The laughter is quiet, but enough to fill the room more warmly than the lamp. When silence returns, you both roll onto your futons, facing the ceiling beams. Outside, a cricket sings as though auditioning for a solo. Inside, your breathing slows, syncing with the household's steady pulse. The day is almost closed, its chores folded into memory. All that remains is the soft descent into night itself. The last lamp flickers low, its glow fading into a fragile halo across the tatami. You kneel beside it, brush away a fleck of soot, and add one last drop of oil. The wick sizzles, the flame steadies for a moment, then sways as though drowsy too. Around you, the house is silent. Children already tucked beneath futons, your wife shifting gently in her sleep, the faintest rustle of cloth marking her dreams. You sit a while longer, sword resting by your side, though tonight it feels more like decoration than defense. The lacquered scabbard gleams faintly in the dim light, a reminder of a life built on battles you'll never fight. You think of the morning drills, the endless rice ledgers, the gossip in tea rooms, the laughter in bathhouse steam, and the small triumph of folding futons properly. It wasn't war, but it was life in its full and ordinary weight. A mainstream fact, many samurai ended their evenings with quiet reflection, sometimes reciting lines from Confucian texts or Buddhist sutras. Self-examination was considered as vital as sword practice, a way to keep the mind sharpened even in peace. Tonight, your reflection is simpler. Gratitude for surviving another day of paperwork, drills, and pickles. The quirky tidbit, some households actually ration the length of their nights by candle clocks, sticks of wax scored with lines that marked the hours as they melted. You glance at your own lamp, oil nearly gone, and realize your day is measured not in victories but in inches of wick. Historians still argue whether samurai found comfort in such nightly routines or merely endured them as obligations. As the flame gutters low, you decide it doesn't matter. The act itself, quiet, steady, repetitive, carries its own peace. At last, you lean down, blow gently, and the flame sighs into darkness. You stretch out on your futon, the straw beneath you cool and familiar, the quilt heavy enough to pin your worries for the night. Outside, crickets sing, the moon drifts pale above the roof, and the world folds into stillness. The wind down begins. The air around you softens, growing heavier, slower. The night settles like a blanket across your body, tucking you into its rhythm. Shadows blur, sounds dim, until only the steady beat of your own breath remains. The futon cradles you, straw and quilt pressing gently into your back, drawing you deeper into rest. Above, the roof beams are silent watchers, steady and unmoving. The paper walls breathe faintly with the wind, their thin panels letting in only the palest silver light of the moon. Every corner of the house quiets, the garden stones outside cooling in the dew, the coals in the brazier long since surrendered to ash, the last whisper of abacus beads finally stilled. Your muscles unwind, loosening thread by thread, shoulders soften, hands unclench, your jaw releases. The sword beside you lies untouched, its silence echoing your own. It does not need to guard tonight. The only duty here is sleep. Dreams begin to gather at the edges, slow as mist over a pond. They weave gently with the memory of festival drums, the laughter of children, the hush of tea steam, the soft crackle of fireworks fading into night. Each image dissolves, melting into the next, until only warmth and calm remain. The house breathes with you. The town sleeps with you. The whole world in this moment is still. And you are safe, carried softly towards sleep, a samurai of peace, resting in the endless quiet of night. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but your eyes flutter open to the faint creak of roof beams and the chill that seeps through paper walls. The house is still, your family bundled in futons, their breathing steady. You lie awake, tracing the ceiling with your gaze, caught in that liminal space between sleep and duty. It isn't time to rise yet, but your mind drifts anyway, rehearsing the day ahead. Scrolls, drills, rice accounts, the same cycle you've traced 100 times before. You shift quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and slide the shoji door aside. The courtyard lies silvered with dew, the moss shining faintly under a thin crescent moon. The night air bites, fresh and clean, filling your lungs in a way the stale office air never can. You wander barefoot along the veranda, each step a whisper. each breath a reminder that sometimes the best part of the day is the part no one else witnesses. A mainstream fact: many samurai practiced morning meditation or recited verses from Zen or Confucian texts to prepare themselves for the duties ahead. Silence itself was considered training, a sharpening of spirit. Tonight, or rather this early morning, you settle on the edge of the veranda, palms resting on your knees, listening not to teachings but to crickets winding down their song. The quirky tidbit? Some manuals advised warriors to rehearse their own death in these quiet hours, a sobering reminder that mortality waits. You try it for a moment, then decide you'd rather rehearse breakfast. Philosophical bravery is easier after rice and pickles. Historians still argue whether such dawn practices were widely embraced or just ideals set down in manuals. Judging by your own drowsy posture, you suspect plenty of samurai skip straight to tea. When the eastern sky finally blushes with pale light, you slip back inside. Your wife stirs faintly, murmuring in her sleep, children shifting beneath quilts. You ease onto your futon again, this time ready for the day's second awakening, the official one, when discipline demands you rise. For now, though, you let yourself drift a little longer, carrying the quiet stillness of the night into the waiting light.